Hey guys, this is Funky Play Brothers, and please remember to subscribe to our YouTube. And today I'm reading another chapter of an original novel, Piggy Infected by Terrence Crawford. Last time we read chapter 2, now let's read chapter 3. The sun was finally coming up, and Ben didn't think he had ever seen anything as beautiful as this sunrise. Officer Doggy took point doing his shaky best to lead them through the forest as the sun rose over the island. The air was crispier out here. Each breath felt like a lungful of hope, and it was a nice change of pace. Maybe it was because he knew that this was the closest to safety he had ever been since he had last seen his family. For the last several hours, he had been dealing with a barrage of smell, everything from gasoline to infected. But for the first time he could remember in a long time, he could actually breathe. This your safe space, Officer Doggy? Ben asked, balling his jacket into a makeshift pillow as he collapsed onto a nearby log. My family and I used to come out here when we wanted to get away from it all, Doggy answered. I've never wanted to get away so badly in my life, he groaned. As the two settled down at an abandoned campsite, are you okay, Officer Doggy? If one of those things back there, I'm fine, Officer Doggy snapped back, probably a bit more aggressively than he meant. I'm fine. I just need to get a little rest. Let's get some sleep. We can think of what to do next in the morning. Even detectives of a caliber can solve the mystery of missing 40 wings. Doggy, I think they were our friends. I think maybe they used to be like us, Ben said out loud for the first time ever, his voice quivering like with uncertainty. Get some sleep, kid, Officer Doggy said, repeating himself. He didn't seem to want to talk about it, and Ben wouldn't push him. The wolf at police headquarters might have been his friend. The infected outside Ollie's house might have been. Suddenly Ben understood why Officer Doggy didn't want to talk about it. Sounds like a plan, Ben agreed. He wasn't used to certain creatures' comforts, but this was certainly his best friend. Now he was in the middle of the forest, hiding from an island of infected people with a police officer while being hunted by a mystery figure in a hood. Ben didn't even have time to comment on the weirdness of it all. He was asleep as soon as his head hit his pillow. Ben didn't know how much time had passed since he woke up. The fire Officer Doggy had crafted out of a few dry branches from the forest was now dying down, its embers casting dancing shadows on the nearby trees. Smoke spiraling lazily into the air. The few stars visible above the island twinkling down on Ben. It seemed as if even the island-wide fog had no jurisdiction over the forest of Lucella. He stood and stretched his joints. Aligning into place the way they could only after sleeping for far too long on a fallen tree in the middle of the forest. He looked around for Officer Doggy, but the policeman was nowhere to be seen. For a moment he thought that his companion might have stepped away to gather more firewood, but as he waited near the dying fire, the far more likely possible began to creep into Ben's mind. He had seen the infected pig swipe off at Officer Doggy back at the gallery. Either Officer Doggy had left in the middle of the night to get help, or he had left because he knew he was becoming one of those things, and he wanted to spare Ben the same fate. Either way, Ben was alone again, just as he had been at the beginning of last night. It was becoming a familiar feeling. Ben sat back down on a log near the campsite, watching the fire die out slowly as the sun rose again. So far, this place had been the safest haven he had come across, even safer than the police station. He had no lead on Ollie's whereabouts, no car to drive anywhere, and now no partner. He decided to wait it out. Maybe Officer Doggy would return, but the longer Ben stayed at the campsite, the more he has proven corrected on what he had known all along. Officer Doggy would not be coming back. Hours passed, turning into days, turning into weeks, or maybe it just felt like that way. All Ben did was eat, sleep, and watch for the infected, though even that was proving to be fruitless endeavor. He had seen one since that night at the gallery. Maybe Doggy has been right about this place. Maybe it was the place on the island that was truly safe from the infected, at least during the day. Ben had the same dream every night. The first few times he had thought it was a nightmare. Now it was as much a part of his routine as brushing his teeth. Every night Ben would fall asleep and dream that he was looking for Ollie. Ben would call his name, the sound echoing across the street until Ollie opened his front door. A familiar smile plastered across his face. Ollie would start laughing, and Ben would cross the street to his friend. But the closer Ben got to Ollie, the farther away he seemed. Ben tried to move faster, but it was like running through quicksand. Every night, but the time he finally got to Ollie's front porch, it was too late. Ollie's skin had gone pale, his eyes glowing red, and every night that was, Ben would wake up. Ben awoke with a start, bolting upright and wiping sweat from his brow. He was less than fond of that dream, but these days it was the only way he got to see his missing friend. Ben shook his head as if that would help to clear it, moving towards his backpack and riffling through it, looking for a bottle of water. He found it quickly, unscrewing the cap and downing half the bottle in a frenzy of thirst. Being the only person you knew was thirsty work. Ben raised a brow, trying to discern the source of the strange sound. He had been alone for so long that if somebody were trying to get the jump on him, they would have to be a whole lot quieter than whatever that was. The sound came through again, the time followed by a voice. Hello? Ben remembered as soon as he heard the voice. He had taken Ollie's walkie-talkie from his house. Someone must be trying to get in contact with him. He tore open the backpack, various compartments and pouches, desperately trying to remember where in the backpack he had tucked away the walkie-talkie. Hello, in frustration, Ben turned the bag upside down and began to shake it. The walkie-talkie tumbled out and falling with a dull thud against the damp forest floor. Ben practically leapt on it, holding the transmission button. Hello, Ollie, Ben called frantically into the cheap plastic two-way. Ben released the transmission button, waiting for a response from the other side. The line went silent, even the static cutting out. Ben couldn't hear his heart pounding in his ears. All this time, and he finally might get to see his best friend. Hello, Ollie, Ben repeated, hoping that his friend on the other end was simply too choked up with emotions to respond to his words. Ben sat against a tree, his hands falling to his side, and as the line went dead once more, but then a crackle. I don't know, and Ollie, I'm sorry. Ben's heart sank for what must have been the 50th time in recent memory. He took his hands off the transmission button, making sure that no one caught the sob in his throat. Holding the walkie-talkie back to his mouth, he spoke into it calmly and matter-of-factly. Sorry, sir, I'm looking for somebody, Ben replied. But his mouth going dry, he realized that this was the first person he had spoken to since Officer Doggy. He silently hoped that they would not suffer the same fate. Don't be sorry, dear boy. I'm looking for someone too, came the voice of on the other end. You are? Ben asked. Of course, with everything going on, there would be others like Ben, other people searching for loved ones. We must have gotten our frequencies crossed. It happens all the time, the voice on the other end of the line said, as though he was discussing the weather. Sure enough, when Ben looked down at the walkie-talkie, it was set to channel 2, and Ollie and Ben had always used channel 3. To communicate with each other. Was that what had gone wrong? Had he been sending out distress calls and location scouts to the wrong walkie-talkie for what amounted to most of his journey? He thought back to Officer Doggy. He had said about skills. Oh well, thanks for the heads up. I hope you find who you're looking for. Ben was ready to end the call, but hurried. Wait, came through the walkie-talkie speaker. Ben placed the two-way back to his ear. You have to help me. I need you to rescue my friend from the... Ben held down the transmission button, trying to make sure that he had heard the voice correctly. I'm sorry, sir. You want me to rescue your friend from where? The school, young man. School, Ben stifled. His reaction even is if the Lucella School District wasn't a hike from his location. Ben couldn't think of a place he would least like to be in this situation. The school was a poorly lit built with way too many rooms for the infected to hide in. So far, he had been attacked by one of those things in just about every building he had entered. He would take his chances in nature. Ben was about to tell the mysterious voice on the other end that he was on his own when another garbling transmission came through on the walkie-talkie. Please, she's all I have left. Ben wasn't sure if he was the man's tone or his words that got to him, but he knew how he felt to be moving through this world without the people and things that gave you joy. Wasn't moving through this world at all. If the infection was going to teach him any lesson, it's that it is the only worth living when people were living for one another. Ben held down the transmission button. I'm going to see what I can do, Ben said, already regretting committing to this journey. It was completely out of his way, and if he didn't know how long it had been since he had last been into town, there was no way to know just how bad the infection had gotten. Had everyone contracted the sickness by now? Would Ben even be able to make it into the city without being spotted or attacked? Oh, thank you, young man. Thank you. Maybe It was the fact that Ben hadn't spoken to anyone else in weeks, but the gratitude in the stranger's voice made Ben well up. Of course, he was going to try to help if was what he would be wanting someone else to do for him. Packing up his few belongings, some food, Ollie's walkie-talkie, and Officer Doggy's taser, and slowing them away from safekeeping, he began the trip back to his town. By the time he reached the city limits, it was dark again. He debated waiting until morning to try to reach the school, but if things were as bad as Ben assumed they were, his new friend might not make it until morning. Officer Doggy hadn't. Ben tried the front door of the school building and was surprised to find it already open. He had been prepared to sneak around, maybe find a missing key or a few exposed gears somewhere, and jimmy his way into the school. This seemed a lot simpler. Ben could tell immediately that he was in territory that had been occupied by the infected. If not because of the smell of wet air, of the sound of heavy breathing as soon as Ben opened the door, then because of the mess. The school looked almost exactly the way that Ben remembered it from when he had taken classes here, but the entire building was in disarray. The papers were stewing on the floor between classrooms, desks were ajar and askew, and the entire building seemed to be coated in a kind of dust that you only find in construction sites. The front door shut lightly behind him. Was Ben basically an expert at shutting doors silently now? He crept inside the hall, still illuminated by a series of overhead lights that gave the entire building a garish shine. Spray painted across a set of lockers was "Do Not Open Monster Inside, TSP." Ben thought it a good idea to take TSP at their word. Ben tiptoed through the school, checking each classroom for anyone who might be friends with the voice of the other end of his walkie-talkie. But his search was proven fruitless. Ben noticed one of the infected creatures sleeping in the science lab, flat on its back across one of the lab tables, drool pooling at the corner of its mouth. At least the infected hadn't changed while Ben had been away. He passed another in a math classroom, this one standing asleep against a blackboard, backing gingerly away. Ben pulled open another door. This was different. Instead of chalkboards and desks, this room had only tables and chairs. The cafeteria. Ben made a beeline for the back opening the fridge and stuffing his face with anything he could find. Having spent the last several weeks living in the woods, he wasn't as picky as his culinary choices as he might otherwise have been. The food that Ben helped himself to created a solid mass in his stomach, a stomach that at all used to be full. Cracking open a bottle of off-brand juice, Ben poured the artificial flavor down his throat, letting out a satisfied sigh as he felt the liquid hit his stomach. Maybe this rescue mission wasn't the worst idea. Then again, he would actually have to finish the rescue part for it to count. He had spent the last few weeks judging the infected creatures from giving into their base impulses to feed and fight. But if he looked at himself right now, he was doing the same thing. He emptied the contents of the fridge into his backpack. If he was this hungry. He couldn't imagine what state his potential rescue would be in. He found her. Ben grabbed the backpack silently, thanking Officer Doggy for leaving him whenever he was. Now all he had to do, find walkie-talkie's forgotten friend. Ben let the refrigerator door shut as he zipped his backpack shut. The refrigerator door clattered against the now empty shelves. The sound echoed through the empty building. Ben craned his neck out of the cafeteria to see the infected creatures in the science lab was still asleep, but he knew the answer already. He couldn't hear the characteristic snoring. He knew what that meant. The infected were awake. His suspiciousness were confirmed when he saw one of the infected at the end of the hall. This was the one from the math classroom. Its stripped orange shirt still marked with chalk dust from the blackboard. Ben froze in his tracks. Every fiber of his being told him to turn around and run, but that would only draw more attention. Plus, there was still the science lab infected left unaccounted for. Ben continued to stand still, frozen in time to any infected or person who might come across him with nothing to see, nothing to do, and nothing to chase. The infected continued stiffly up the stairs, waiting for its next opportunity to attack. It wouldn't have won if Ben had anything to say about it. As the infected passed, Ben went to work. He examined the hammer he pulled off Officer Doggy's bag with an eye and a mission. It was just one of the tools Ben had used to survive in the forest. It had been dulled from use, but it would serve its purpose. Ben had been using it to build, but hammers could take things apart just as easily as they could assemble them. Making sure that the infected had returned to its home base of the math classroom, Ben went to work pulling nails out of the floorboards and pulling them into his bag once again. He thought back to Officer Doggy and their talk about skills. The good thing about skills was that it was never too late to learn new ones. The job didn't take long, and it would have been even quicker if Ben hadn't been so afraid to make noise. But now that was the goal. Ben pulled the hammer out of the floorboard with a dull thwack. Even this small amount of noise was enough to lure the infected back, but this time Ben was ready. The infected approached him as they all did, slowly, almost lumbering towards him, and raised their weapons. They had this particular infected carried with a jagged yardstick. For a moment, Ben wondered who this had been before it was infected, but only for a moment. Ben chapped worked, and as the infected took another halted, lurching step toward Ben, it tumbled through the floor, now loosened up by Ben's handiwork. Ben peered through the floor at the infected, who had landed stunned. Ben's celebration was cut short. However, when he heard a scream from the lower level, it wasn't like the squeals of infected creatures, all blurting and grunting. No, this was a scream of terror, a scream that sent shivers down his spine, a sensation. He would be used to at this point, running down the stairs. He leapt over the unconscious infected, following the sound of the screaming. The sound led him down a hallway just past where the infected had fallen through the floor. This must be Ben's mysterious mystery friend. Ben reasoned. No one understood just how scary these things could be, but if his new companion couldn't curtail her understandable urge to scream, they would have to be more of the creatures of their tales than they could handle. Ben was reminded of the group of infected creatures outside the art gallery, attracted to at first to the car's honking horn and then later to the sputter sound of the vehicle made as it ran out of fuel. Ben quickly pulled the front door down, now using his trusty hammer to pull the hinges off the door. It was a small closet, likely used for mops and brooms when this place was a school, but now it was Ben's height huddled in the corner among the boxes of old sponges and packed to chuck. Yet another scream hitched in her throat as Ben tore the door off. Before she realized that Ben was not one of them, the girl had light brown skin and she wore a small cyan-tinted white dress. Two short ears stood atop her head. Two short ears stood atop her, created by the fact that she would twitch every few seconds. Her dark eyes were offset by glowing white pupils, and her nose was light pink, settling plainly between her small dark red cheeks. She took in another sharp inhalation of breath, then quickly interrupting what he assumed to be the prelude to another scream. "Hi, long story, but I'm here to help you get out of here," Ben explained quietly. There was still at least one of the infected creatures left, and Ben wasn't sure if he had finished off the one who had fallen into his trap. The captive nodded, tiny ears jostling slightly forward as she did. "Sally," she said, introducing herself. "Nice to meet you," Ben said, already looking for a way out of the school. If Ben had learned anything in the last few weeks, it had been the importance of an escape route. "My name is Ben. Friend of yours sent me here to rescue," Ben explained. As he tucked his hammer behind into his backpack, the food he had stuffed into the bag earlier rose to the surface as he dug around for a place to put the hammer. "Are you hungry?" Ben offered. His bag certainly boasted until enough ill-gotten gains to feed them both for at least the time it would take them to get to the safe zone in the forest. Sally's nose twitched, her ears swivelling forward on the top of her head. As Ben showed her his stash, slowly she reached for 2 acorns. This first of the two disappeared into her mouth. As she spoke, brown acorn crumbs spilled out of her mouth and down on her white dress. "Sorry, sweet tooth," Sally apologized. Ben chuckled. He would understand if somebody had been there with a bag of sweets when he first woke up inside Ollie's house. All that time ago, Sally took a swing from the stompered glass vial and off to Doggy's bag, drinking down some of the rainbow-colored liquid inside before wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Sorry, but it has just been me and my beau here for days. We were hiding out in the school gym until those things came and took over the school." Ben zipped his bag, throwing it back over his shoulder, and the walkie-talkie voice hadn't said anything about a second rescue, and Ben and Sally were skating on thin ice as it was. There was still one of the infected creatures unaccounted for, and an ingenuous of his trap there was no telling how long the infected would be out of commission. Ben let out a sigh. He had come this far. He wasn't going to leave anyone behind. Do you know where your bow is now? Sally raised a throwing bro. Bro, my bow? Well, it's right here, isn't it? Sally turned, reached back into the closet to pull out a piece of small wooden machinery, a crossbow. Your bow, repeated as the realization dawned on him. Great, let's go. Ben extended his hand, helping Sally to her feet. She brushed dust and acorn crumbs off her dress onto the floor, and together they exited the storage closet. The infected creature's worm Ben had laid a trap for upstairs still lay on the floor outside the room, both the wind and consciousness knocked out of it for the time being. They stepped cautiously over the pig's creature's sleeping body. Even if Ben was proud of his trap had worked out, knew better than anyone that if it didn't make much noise at all, to wake one of these creatures up and alert them to to your presence. In the hallway, Ben screwed his eyes shut tightly, trying to remember the way he had planned to get out of the school. He would just have to retrace his steps. Sally tapped Ben's shoulder nervously several times. Not now, Sally. I'm trying to find us a way out of here, Ben said, opening his eyes. Then set of lockers looked familiar. Logic tacted that if he followed landmarks, anything that would, like he had already seen it eventually, then they would reach the exit. Why don't you just ask them? Ben had to look to see who she was talking about. Here there are more survivors in the school. His gaze followed Sally's eyes, finally landing where her finger was pointing before wide. The Science Lab infected was lumbering toward them, woken from its beauty sleep. And not a moment too soon, a pack of other infected joined it, their glowing red eyes shining ominously against the backdrop of the classroom that they had come from. Ben put himself between Sally and the new infected creatures. He drew his hammer from Officer Doggy's backpack. He wished that Officer Doggy had left him a bigger hammer. Ben, it was better than nothing. Ben had seen the alternative, and he was not a fan. Stay behind me. Don't make a move, and when I say so, we need to run. Ben waited for Sally's response, anything to acknowledge that she had heard him, and that they were on the same page. Instead, he was greeted by a soft crunching sound. Ignoring his instincts to keep his eyes trained on the infected, Ben turned to look at Sally. Sally nodded at Ben as she crunched quickly on the other acorn she had taken from Officer Doggy's backpack. Ben's eyes went wide at her timing. The thought of possibly being eaten didn't do much to stir Ben appreciated, but to each their own. Sally continued to gnaw at the gnaw at the acorn on the acorn until she had chewed it down into a cone shape, making it sharper than the end. She twisted the newly made arrowhead onto the end of a stick and fitted into her crossbow, raising the combination to the level of her eye. She screwed up her face in coronation, closed one eye, and fired. The arrow flew true, launching itself out of Sally's bow with impressive force. The acorn whistled through the air, striking the infected from the science classroom right between its glowing red eyes. The creatures wobbled onto its feet, stunned by the force of the airborne missile. Ben couldn't help but let out an exhilarating cheer. Another infected creature from another classroom reacted to the sound, advancing on Ben and Sally. I can't believe that worked, Ben admitted, as he and Sally backed away from the infected. The monstrous thing continued to move toward them until they could go no farther. Their backs pressed against a row of purple lockers. I guess this is it for us, Sally bemoaned. If only I hadn't eaten our ammo. The creature wiped out at them, missing as Ben pushed Sally out of the way. Still, the creature caught her arm with its claws as she let out a bellow of pain. This way, Ben yelled, running toward the conference room, holding off an infected tiger with his hammer. Sally took off after him, moving as quickly as she could while gripping her arm. As the infected creatures followed Ben and Sally down the hall, as Ben managed to force the door open, the force of the infected having recovered from the stunning effect that Sally's bow had. The infected made their way to the conference room, lumbering about the office space, looking for their prey. With careful steps, Ben and Sally snuck out of the other side of the conference room, slamming the door shut behind them and placing Ben's hammer through the latch, effectively trapping the infected in the conference room. Ben and Sally cheered for themselves, elated in their own ignorancy. If it wouldn't last, but if it was clever enough to buy the duo time to get out of the school. Ben collapsed to his knees, exhausted, pulling Ollie's walkie-talkie out of Officer Doggy's bag. He flipped the machine open and held the transmission button. Come in. Hello, sir? Come in. Sally joined him on the floor, wincing in pain. One of the infected creatures had attacked her while they were trying to make their escape. Ben didn't know a lot about how the infected worked, but he knew that he tried to avoid contact with the infected whenever he could. Are you all right, Sally? She gave a half-hearted thumbs up, clearly the worse for wear. What were you doing in a place like this with the infection going around? Ben asked. Same thing you are. I'm guessing supply runs, looking for other survivors, other like us. You don't know who is on your other side of that walkie-talkie of yours, do you? Ben was about to answer and realized that was right as he had been eager to play hero, that he had never been asked for a name. Sally continued, I came here looking for you, for one of my teachers. I was going to go and get her and we were going to get out of on a helicopter. The mission went bad and I got stuck in a room with those animals on the loose. Sally nodded towards Ben. What about you? Ben swallowed dryly. I was looking for a friend of mine. I am looking for a friend of mine. Well, you've made a new one here, Sally said. Thanks, Sally, Ben said, appreciative. In a wood like this, you need all the friends you could get. Sally sat upright. You know, I think the static of Ollie's walkie-talkie crackled once more from familiar posh except come in, Charlie indicating on the other end. Young man, are you there? Ben answered the walkie-talkie by holding down the button on the side. Yeah, I'm here, and your friend is safe. I couldn't have gotten out of there myself, Sally chimed in. Sally, dear, I feared I would never hear from you again. No such luck, boss, Sally reported into the walkie-talkie. I'm so glad that you were able to find her, young man. Listen to me very carefully now. Just outside the school there is a metro station. Take the railway and meet me at the carnival. I have others with me. You will all be safe here. I'll see you soon, Sally said matter-of-factly. Oh, I certainly hope so, came the eeriest reply. If Sally was annoyed by whoever was on the other end, she didn't show it. Ben really was starting to wonder just who it was that he was helping. And that's the end of chapter 3. And I really liked it because I think Sally's supposed to be Bunny from the game, and the person talking to you is supposed to be like Mr. P, aka Mr. Potato, or Pony and Zizzy. I don't really know who it's supposed to be yet, but I really like that chapter. And if when in this chapter that with camp, Doggy is infected, because in the real game at the camp he's infected. And come back for chapter 4 of this book. So guys, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Follow us on Twitter at the Funky Play Bros. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Funky Play Brothers. Support our vlog at cashapp at the $ Funky Play Bros. So get more unboxings, more taste tests, more adventures, more monies, more reading Thursdays, and for support. Thank you for watching. Bye.